This passage is adapted from James Joyce, A Little Cloud. 8 years before he had seen his friend off at the North Wall and wished him Godspeed, Gallagher had got on. You could tell that at once by his travelled air, his well cut tweed suit, and fearless accent. Few fellows had talents like his, and fewer still could remain unspoiled by such success. Gallagher's heart was in the right place and he had deserved to win. It was something to have a friend like that. Little Chandler's thoughts ever since lunchtime had been of his meeting with Gallagher, of Gallagher's invitation, and of the great city of London where Gallagher lived. He was called Little Chandler because, though he was but slightly under the average stature, he gave one the idea of being a little man. His hands were white and small, his frame was fragile, his voice was quiet, and his manners were refined. He took the greatest care of his fair silken hair and moustache and used perfume discreetly on his handkerchief. The half moons of his nails were perfect, and when he smiled, you caught a glimpse of a row of childish white teeth. As he sat at his desk in the King's Inn, he thought what changes those 8 years had brought. The friend whom he had known under a shabby and necessitous guise had become a brilliant figure on the London press. He turned often from his tiresome writing to gaze out of the office window. The glow of a late autumn sunset covered the grass plots and walks. It cast a shower of kindly golden dust on the untidy nurses and decrepit old men who drowsed on the benches. It flickered upon all the moving figures, on the children who ran screaming along the gravel paths, and on everyone who passed through the gardens. He watched the scene and thought of life, and as always happened when he thought of life, he became sad. A gentle melancholy took possession of him. He felt how useless it was to struggle against fortune, this being the burden of wisdom which the ages had bequeathed to him. He remembered the books of poetry upon his shelves at home. He had bought them in his bachelor days, and many an evening, as he sat in the little room of the hall, he had been tempted to take one down from the bookshelf and read out something to his wife. But shyness had always held him back, and so the books had remained on their shelves. At times he repeated lines to himself, and this consoled him. When his hour had struck, he stood up and took leave of his desk and of his fellow clerks punctiliously. He emerged from under the feudal arch of the King's Inns, a neat, modest figure, and walked swiftly down Henrietta Street. The golden sunset was waning and the air had grown sharp. A horde of grimy children populated the street. They stood or ran in the roadway or crawled up the steps before the gaping doors or squatted like mice upon the thresholds. Little Chandler gave them no thought. He picked his way deftly through all that minute life and under the shadow of the gaunt, spectral mansions in which the old nobility of Dublin had roistered. No memory of the past touched him, for his mind was full of a present joy. He had never been in Corlesses, but he knew the value of the name. He knew that people went there after the theatre to eat oysters, and he had heard that the waiters there spoke French and German. Walking swiftly by at night, he had seen cabs drawn up before the door, and richly dressed ladies escorted by cavaliers alight and enter quickly. They wore noisy dresses and many wraps. Their faces were powdered, and they caught up their dresses when they touched earth. He had always passed without turning his head to look. It was his habit to walk swiftly in the street, even by day, and whenever he found himself in the city late at night, he hurried on his way apprehensively and excitedly. Sometimes, however, he quoted the causes of his fear. He chose the darkest and narrowest streets, and as he walked boldly forward, the silence that was spread about his footsteps troubled him. The wandering silent figures troubled him, and at times the sound of low fugitive laughter made him tremble like a leaf. He turned to the right towards Cable Street. Ignatius Gallagher on the London press. Who would have thought it possible 8 years before? Still, now that he reviewed the past, little Chandler could remember many signs of future greatness in his friend. With choice best summarizes the passage. A character reunites with an old friend and discovers that they cannot resume that friendship. An invitation from an old friend prompts a character to reflect on both the past and the present. A chance meeting with an old friend inspires a character to start a new life in another country. A character's recent professional success prompts him to provide assistance to an old friend. So this has to be option B, right? Because we learn in the passage that uh, Gallagher, right, and little Chandler, they're supposed to meet. And the whole passage is about little Chandler looking back to the past and the present, which is what option B is saying. Option A is wrong because they haven't actually met yet in the passage. And option C is also wrong because the meeting hasn't happened. And we don't know the purpose of their meeting. We don't know whether Gallagher is going to provide assistance to little Chandler. So it's not D. Which choice best describes the state of mind that Gallagher's return inspires in little Chandler? He is impressed by Gallagher's success, even though thinking about it calls to mind his own unhappiness. He's anxious to downplay Gallagher's achievements in an attempt to make his own look better. He envies Gallagher's remarkable success and is angry about how Gallagher achieved it. He admires Gallagher's rise to fame but is thankful that he himself lives a relatively inconspicuous life. Okay, so I don't think it's C because these are very strong words, anger and envy. So I'm just going to read back to the passage a little bit. Little Chandler's thoughts ever since lunchtime had been of his meeting with Gallagher, of Gallagher's invitation, and of the great city of London where Gallagher lived. He was called Little Chandler because though he was but slightly under the average stature, he gave one the idea of being a little man. He thought of what changes those 8 years had brought. The friend had become a brilliant figure. He turned often from his tiresome writing. The glow of a late autumn sunset. Okay. So I think that he is, yeah, I think A would be a good answer because he definitely sounds impressed, but he also realizes that his own life has not turned out as successfully, right? And we talk about melancholy in the passage, so that seems to be a good answer. I don't think he's anxious to downplay Gallagher's achievements, right? He understands that his own achievements pale in comparison to Gallagher's, so it's not B. And I don't think he's thankful that he lives a relatively inconspicuous life because there is a sense of disappointment, right? Which choice best supports the idea that little Chandler seeks to rationalize his own passivity? Okay, I just need to mark these lines. So let me open this. Okay, so this is 6 to 10, 22 to 27, 6 to 10. This one, right? 22 to 27. This one. And then you have 37, 39, 41, 45. 37, 39, 41 to 45. Okay. So he seeks to rationalize his own passivity. Few people had talents like him, and fewer still could remain unspoiled by success. Gallagher's heart was in the right place, and he had deserved to win. It was something to have a friend like that. As he sat at his desk, he thought what changes those 8 years had brought. The friend had become a brilliant figure, right? He felt how useless it was to struggle against fortune, this being the burden of wisdom which the ages had bequeathed to him. It brought them in his bachelor days in many an evening as he sat in the little room of the hall. He had been tempted. Okay, so this option seems to talk about his acceptance of his fate, because he says that it's useless to struggle against fortune. So he is somewhat, what's the word that the passage uses? Yeah, he rationalizes his own passivity, right? So I like C. The first one basically talks about his thoughts on Gallagher, so that's not relevant. The second one also describes his thoughts on Gallagher and how Gallagher rose. And the last option is just a description of this bookshelf, right? So it doesn't really tell you anything about his passivity. So C is a good answer. It can reasonably be inferred from the passage that one of little Chandler's prominent characteristics is that he is exclusively boastful of his personal achievements, often unpredictable in his dealings with other people, highly critical of other people's aspirations, somewhat vain about his personal appearance. Okay, is this related to? No, it's not. Um, Vain about his personal appearance. Did that come up at any point? Um, he took the greatest care of his fair silken hair and mustache and used perfume discreetly on his handkerchief. The half moons of his nails were perfect, and he had a row of childish white teeth. Yeah, so he was vain about his personal appearance. He doesn't come across as boastful. In fact, he's quite, um, aware of the fact that he hasn't achieved all that much. His dealings with other people don't really come up in the passage, so that's not the answer. And he's not critical of other people's aspirations. In fact, he mentions at one point that he's happy for Gallagher's achievements and his success. The observations in lines 27 to 37, the glow of him mainly served to 27 to 37. Okay, the glow of a late autumn sunset covered the grass plots and walks. It cast a shower of kindly golden dust on the untidy nurses and decrepit old men who drowsed on the benches. It flickered upon all the moving figures, on the children who ran screaming along the gravel paths, and on everyone who passed through the gardens. He watched the scene and thought of life. And as always happened when he thought of life, he became sad. A gentle melancholy took possession of him. Okay, so this purpose is to dramatize how the sunset alters the interactions among those in the garden who witness it, suggests that the natural beauty of the sunset affects all the people in the gardens equally, convey the subtle influence that the sunset exerts on little Chandler's mood, suggests that the people in the garden share little Chandler's attitude towards the sunset. Yeah, so I think C would be a good answer here, because what is being said here is that he's sitting in his office and he's looking out the window and the sun is setting, and that whole experience kind of reiterates his views of himself, because he the words that are used, right? Untidy nurses and decrepit old men, right? And that kind of brings out this sense of melancholy that he feels, right? So this scene is meant to accentuate that melancholy. So I like C. I don't think the sunset alters the interactions among those in the gardens, right? It's simply little Chandler's perspective. It doesn't suggest that the natural beauty affects all the people in the garden equally. That doesn't even sound right, because different characters are described, and people in the garden, their attitude is not brought up, right? So it's not that. As used in line 51, figure most nearly refers to the this one, right? He emerged from under the feudal arch of the King's Inns, a neat, modest figure, and walked swiftly down Henrietta Street. Okay, so depiction of a person in artwork, social position occupied by a person, image presented by a person's body, historical importance of a person. So a modest figure would be, in this context, the image that is presented by little Chandler, right? We learn in the passage that he is of a small stature, so that goes with modest figure. This is not artwork, right? This doesn't refer to his social position or his historical importance. By saying in line 61 that no memory of the past touched little Chandler, the narrator most likely means that little Chandler doesn't fix his attention on the age and decay of his surroundings during his walk, can analyze his memories while remaining comparatively unaffected by them, tends to retain few memories of his personal experiences, is unable to recall key memories of Gallagher. Okay, so this comes here. So this is the part where he's walking to the call lesses to meet Gallagher, and this kind of talks about how he observed everything, but he didn't really participate in the scene, right? Little Chandler gave them no thought. He picked his way deftly through all that minute life, and under the shadow of the gaunt spectral mansions in which the old nobility of Dublin had roistered, no memory of the past touched him, for his mind was full of a present joy. So I think B would be a good answer, that he can analyze his memories while remaining in the present and not letting those memories overwhelm him. It's the point of describing the surrounding is not to bring out their age and decay. It's more to focus on little Chandler's state of mind. Yeah, he definitely retains more than a few memories, as we learn. So it's not about forgetting things. So both C and D are wrong. Based on the passage, which choice best identifies a contradictory impulse in little Chandler's character? He fixates on a social world that he ultimately believes to be a hollow spectacle. He immerses himself in sights and sounds that strike him as ultimately frivolous. He scorns a historical era that he concedes is preferable in some ways to the present. He derives excitement from placing himself in settings he finds menacing. Okay, I'm leaning towards D because there was this whole part about him walking in desolate streets, but since this is evidence based, let's mark the lines 58 to 62 and 58 to 62. Let's mark that first. 58 to 62. Okay, then you have 67 to 72. 67 to 72. Okay. Then 72 to 76, 72 to 76, and 76 to 82. 76 to 82. Okay, so we are talking about a contradictory impulse in his character. He picked his way deftly through all that minute life, and under the shadow of the gaunt spectral mansions in which the old nobility of Dublin had roistered, no memory of the past touched him. Walking swiftly by at night, he had seen cabs drawn up before the door and richly dressed ladies escorted by cavaliers alight and enter quickly. He had always passed without turning his head to look. It was his habit to walk swiftly in the street, And whenever he found himself in the city late at night, he hurried on. Sometimes, however, he quoted the causes of his fear. He quoted the causes of his fear. He chose the darkest and narrowest streets, and as he walked boldly, the silence that was spread around his footsteps troubled him. So, this in fact supports the last option of question 8, where it talks about he derives excitement from placing himself in settings that he finds menacing, right? Because it very clearly states that, he quoted the causes of his fear. He chose these streets even when, the silence around him troubled him. These other options, like for example, the ladies and the fact that he passed them without looking, they don't indicate a contradictory impulse in his character. Right. Mm, okay. I don't think there is any mention of a hollow spectacle. I don't think he thinks that the social world that he fixates on is a hollow spectacle. Yeah. Again, I don't think that he thinks those sights and sounds are frivolous. He doesn't really participate in the scene, but there's no evidence for frivolous. And there is no mention of a historical era. Everything that is happening is in the present here, right? So 8 and 9 both are D. The main effect of the last paragraph is to convey little Chandler's sense that hindsight has lent a degree of inevitability to Gallagher's success. Let's just read the last paragraph. He turned to the right towards Capel Street. Ignatius Gallagher on the London press. Who would have thought it possible? Still, now that he reviewed the past, he could remember many signs of future greatness. Okay. So, convey his sense that hindsight has lent a degree of inevitability to Gallagher's success. Suggests the extent to which the news of Gallagher's success has altered little Chandler's memory of him. Demonstrate that little Chandler's confidence in Gallagher has been vindicated by Gallagher's success. Characterize little Chandler as regretful that he had failed to foresee Gallagher's success. So it's A, right? Because it very clearly states here that now that he thought about it, he could remember many signs of future greatness in his friend. So there was a sense of inevitability that hindsight now provides him evidence for, right? So that's what A is saying. The success of Gallagher, the news of his success has not altered his memory of him. So B is not correct. Yeah, the fact that he had confidence in him is not something that he thought about, you know, or he thought about in a way which was definite and given. This was something that he now thinks is, the memory of Gallagher brings him to the idea that, yes, his success was kind of inevitable. So, this confidence being vindicated is not supported by the passage. And yeah, there is no sense of regret that he failed to foresee. It's just that he understands that, yes, it was inevitable. Okay, let's grade this. So, okay, question 1, B, A, C, D, C. 1 second. Yeah. B, A, C, D, C. And number 6, C, A, D, D, A. C, A, D, D, A. Okay, 7, let me just confirm. Yeah, 7 is A. Okay, no memory of the past touched little Chandler. So, okay. So they think it's A, which says that, and we know that he's kind of, this is the part where he's walking. Yeah, And yeah, it is true that he doesn't fixate on the surroundings, but I thought when we talked about memory of the past, it wasn't so much the surrounding as his impression of Gallagher, and the fact that there is this sense of melancholy that he felt when he was thinking about it. So uh, but perhaps B is an extreme answer, because we also know from the earlier part of the passage that he does get melancholic when he thinks about the past, right? So it's not that those memories don't affect him. So in the context of this paragraph, A would make sense, even though I felt that perhaps this memory of the past would not really refer to his immediate surroundings. Right. So that was question 7.